This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
As the month of May heats up and my schedule becomes increasingly busier, this will be the ultimate test. Will this channel persevere? Will I be able to withstand the pain and torture? And we'll see. I know for a fact my weekdays are pretty much shot. So when I end up watching these classic shows, it's going to be like 9 o'clock at night when I'm trying to do all this. Which is the perfect way to detox from a hectic schedule, I have to admit. What used to be my weekly AEW experience quickly became the now Midsouth review experience. What a great trade-off. Thank God for that. After what I've been hearing about Dynamite this past Wednesday night, I think the bloom's pretty much off the rose at this point. Anyone that even called into question the idea that Tony Khan was the ultimate money mark, well, they've been suitably chastened. All you need to know is the following number. A Brian Alvarez statistic. 683,000. That right there will tell you everything you need to know. The state of that godforsaken product in 2024. So yeah, we're back for another Friday round here on the FSWR channel, the good old Territory Wrestling Podcast. We got a pretty landmark historic episode of Crockett TV to cover in just a bit here. I kept going back and forth on how I wanted to address the Crockett Cup because, well, technically that two-night event had already began by the time the Saturday syndicated show rolled around. They had actually already done the first night in Greenville, which were basically all the prelim tournament matches. So that left Greensboro for the following night. Also the same date that this episode aired on the Superstation. Taped, obviously. In any case, last couple years we've been doing the NWA recaps. I've tried to strategically run down some of the key matches in the tournament and do a semi-Crockett Cup review. Not a full one, obviously. You know, just trying to pinpoint the highlights. I mean, that's really out of the realm of conversation this year. I mean, there's no way I'm dedicating an extra 2 to 3 hours to scrubbing through a bunch of YouTube footage to find the 88 Crockett Cup stuff. I mean, we'll address some of the stuff they air on TV in the next couple weeks. But as far as doing like a deep dive into the Crockett Cup, I'm just not going to have time for it. So, with that, I guess now would be a good time to dive into this very substantial episode of Crockett TV. April 23rd, 1988. A day that will live in infamy for all the die-hard Crockett fans. And our journey with World Championship Wrestling continues as we begin with, as I directly wrote down here in my notes, an attempted hanging. So, you know, just your casual day at the office in Atlanta, I presume. Tensions were high here in 1988. A lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. Not joking, by the way. That was their cold open for the week. The first thing we see at the very top of the program is a clip from the Sunday syndicated show where the Midnight Rider shows up to surprise Tully and JJ by taking a noose, wrapping it around Tully's neck in an attempt to kill him. And not only is that ridiculous on its face, it is then immediately made into a comedy skit as the fans are going absolutely nuts, watching as the Midnight Rider is choking out Tully with a noose. Meanwhile, JR is screaming to the top of his lungs, "The Midnight Rider is trying to hang Tully!" Murder. Attempted murder at that. Somehow TBS did not get sued for airing this. Go figure. So again, just to recap. Our show opened with a man being hung by a bull rope, an effort to kill a man in broad daylight on national cable television. And then we go directly to Jacksonville for this taped show where the announcers are peachy as clams, welcoming everybody to this family-friendly show, talking about all the great ring action we're in store for. Never mind the visual of a man being choked to death in the previous clip. He's fine. And in fact, he will be wrestling in the main event for the NWA World Tag Team titles. Well, okay then. Because it really was no big deal after all. Apparently, attempted manslaughter was not a criminal offense in 1988. Maybe the laws were different back in the day. I also like David Crockett's description of the Midnight Rider at ringside, referring to him as different. Well, that is certainly a word to describe a man that openly tries to strangle people in front of God and everyone. Different, you say. Sure. We will go with that theory, David. So anyway, we open with Sting versus Dave Isley. Again, this was a tape show from the Jacksonville Coliseum, so the crowd was nuclear hot for just about everything. Even things as simple as a body slam or an arm drag takeover. People went batshit for all this. Of course, Sting did his usual flurry of offense and won with a scorpion in like 60 seconds. And then he had a quick follow-up promo where he informed everybody that he's got a new project to attend to. Instead of a 45-minute match with the Nature Boy, he wants 60. That was his plan. This is what Sting voluntarily wanted. He wanted a rematch with Ric Flair for the World Heavyweight title, but rather it be a 45-minute time limit with 3 judges at ringside. Now he wants 60 minutes. That is a very odd request for a babyface. I honestly had no idea what to make of this promo. It was very random and scatterbrained. Kind of like most of Sting's promos. So then the absurdity on the show continues. After we just saw the Midnight Rider attempt to kill Tully with a bull rope, now we flash back to a recent match that he had with Big Bear Collie, where, again, I'm not making this shit up. This is the alleged babyface Midnight Rider in action. He gets in the ring, immediately assaults Big Bear Collie with a chair, DDTs him face first on said chair, which somehow still constituted a legal pin. And then just because he's a dick, apparently, he does it again. Am I missing something? I mean, I know Steve Austin did some pretty shady stuff when he was still a babyface throughout the Attitude Era. But at least we established by then that he was sort of a beer-drinking badass. mostly in an effort to appeal to a bunch of mouth-breathing degenerates. This is still when wrestling was more family-oriented. In what way is the Midnight Rider a babyface with the way he is being presented right now? This guy has now tried to end somebody's career by smashing his head into a chair, and he has attempted consummate murder. I'm having a hard time buying into the likable qualities of this man. I mean, I get he's an outlaw, but come on now. So as I continue to wrap my head around that and see where that goes, let's go back to Jacksonville for the Fantastics versus Kerry Stevens and Snake Watson. What easily had to be the worst Fantastics match I've ever seen. The trend continues. Every week, they're selectively fed a progressively worse set of job guys to work with. At the rate they're going, the next notch below Kerry Stevens and Snake Watson would have been 2 cardboard cutouts. Actually, I shouldn't joke. The cutouts may have been more agile than these 2 idiots. Dude. This is fucking horrible. Laughably bad. There's a point in this match where the Fantastics went to try to do the drop down spot so Stevens could leap over Fulton and then get hit with a drop kick from Rogers. I have no idea what planet this guy was on. Kerry Stevens did not jump over Bobby Fulton. He basically tripped over Fulton's body and then fell into Tommy's drop kick like a lumbering tree bark. I seriously need to know where the hell they found these clowns. You could have put any fucking ham and egger from Jacksonville in the ring for 5 minutes with the Fantastics. I promised you they were all better athletes than these 2 schmucks. Fulton and Rogers won with a rocket launcher. I have nothing else to add beyond what I just said about this being an all-time horrible Fantastics match. Like, it was so bad, even the Fantastics got visibly pissed off the longer it went. At least they were able to fire up a little bit for their promo afterwards, promoting the big lashing stipulation for the Fantastics Midnight Showdown. Basically noting that if the Fantastics win, they will get to whip the Midnights 10 times apiece with a leather belt. And that includes Jim Cornette, the one that instigated the whole thing. So they are looking for sweet revenge. And then we came back for a fun little hoss fight. Dr. Death Steve Williams wrestled Bob Riddle. It only went about 45 seconds, but it was still awesome. Riddle tried to shove Williams out of the gate. That pretty much wrote his death sentence. Steve threw him around for a bit. Ended up going over with the Oklahoma Stampede. At which point, he did a very quick post-match promo. He is now drenched in fucking sweat. I have no idea how a 45-second TV squash can spawn so much perspiration on a human body. But holy cow. And Williams cut a fired-up promo on Ric Flair, telling him that he's coming for the NWA World Heavyweight title. Very direct message. Short and sweet. Probably the best promo you were ever going to get out of Dr. Death, if we're being honest. And then we came back for the Midnight Express versus Tommy Angel and Rocky King. Okay, no joke. For my own amusement, I really would have been intrigued to see if Beautiful Bobby and Sweet Stan could have gotten anything watchable out of Kerry Stevens and Snake Watson. If they would have swapped opponents for those 2 matches, it would have been perfect. No, instead they gave Bobby and Stan the moderately good job guys to work with. Well, Rocky was good. Tommy Angel always kind of sucked. He was certainly better than Kerry fucking Stevens and Snake flippin' Watson. So this segment basically had one major highlight, And that was JC being informed of the stipulation for the upcoming Fantastics Midnights match. Apparently, he was not paying attention to the tape earlier when the Fantastics did their promo. So he was not aware of the fact that if the Fantastics win, not only will they get to strap Bobby and Stan, but they will also get to strap Corny as well. And upon hearing this news, Cornette begins to have a legitimate conniption at the commentary booth, screaming that Jim Crockett does not have the authority to do that. And the glee in David's voice when he goes, "He sure does." Total mark-out moment. It's great because the announcers are there the whole time just rubbing it in, saying that Cornette was the one responsible for starting this whole thing, so he should take his lashings like a man. And while Corny's trying to feign being sick, saying he might not be able to make the show after all, Tony Schiavone just goes, "Of course you'll be there, Jim. Don't even try. We all know you're fucked." It was pretty great. The overacting is always what makes it work. The announcers always having to be like, "Dude, calm down. You're peeking the mic." I just love the idea that this was Corny's first time hearing about the added stipulation. So you actually see his reaction shift in real time, where he goes from super confident to super worried in a split moment. There was also a line at the end where he added, "Fantastics, you'll be wishing you're giving birth to a 20-pound porcupine instead of getting in the ring with the Midnights." Quite the spontaneous metaphor. And that took us to a Ric Flair interview. And you'll be shocked to hear this. He was quite over in Jacksonville, especially with the ladies. He responded to Sting and Dr. Death's promos from earlier on. Did all his usual Flair jingoisms. He acknowledged that his fans are into luxury lifestyles and fine dining. And, he basically told his group of gals that he was going to let them ride Space Mountain. And then he said he would also like to share with David Crockett. I don't know what was going on there, but if the insinuation was that Ric Flair let David Crockett ride Space Mountain with him, well, there's a lot to be calling into question with that. Before we get too deep in the weeds with that conversation, let's talk about the Powers of Pain and Ivan Koloff versus Max MacGyver, Bob Emery, and Kurt Thompson. I have no idea what chip the Barbarian had on his shoulder this week, but this dude came out with guns blazing. He beat the shit out of these guys. Just laid into him with chops and boots. I mean, he looked like he was blowing off some steam here. Maybe he had some rough travel. I mean, it was all the usual Paul Jones Army Massacre. I just couldn't get over how aggressive the Barbarian was this week. And they took turns beating up all three job guys. I like how, after all the punishment they get put through here, the finish was Ivan coming in and then getting the pin with a Hulk Hogan leg drop. What a rib. I always knew Ivan had a good sense of humor. And then we get a super serious angle at ringside with Jimmy Garvin. Actually, it was a promo. It wasn't an angle. But he let us know that Kevin Sullivan's attempts at kidnapping, I repeat, kidnapping Precious, were insane. That was the word he used. An attempted kidnapping from the Varsity Club was considered insanity. So we have now had a segment on this show where one man was nearly killed and hanged with a rope. Now we're being told that another man trying to kidnap a woman and do God knows what to her, we're told that is merely insane. An attempted kidnapping and an attempted murder. Are we sure this is still a family-friendly show? Here's what I'm still trying to figure out. Again, logical smart fan speaking here, you'll have to pardon me. If Jimmy Garvin is so concerned about the well-being and protection of his wife, if he knows for a fact that there is a man trying to openly harm her, why the fuck is she still coming to the venues with Jimmy? Just stay home. Don't come. And if you have to come, get some police. Arm her with security. I mean, we're basically at the point now where Garvin is angry that his wife is in grave danger because of these deranged bad guys, yet he still keeps bringing her to the fucking shows. What kind of husband is this Nimrod? At this point, you'd argue Jimmy deserves what's coming to him. Just for being a dumbass. I forgot how stupid this storyline is. In case that wasn't already obvious. And after we finish that tirade, we come back to the ring for Al Perez versus Larry Stevens, where I wrote down the one singular bullet point. Bathroom break. Not kidding. I actually wrote those words down before actually pursuing said bathroom break. I presume Al won. And then we had Nikita Koloff versus Crusher Nolt. Yeah, I got nothing. Apparently they were reminiscing about the good old days of the Russians and felt obligated to have Nikita wrestle a guy with the name Crusher. Because after all, Barry Darsow was ripping it up in WWF doing Demolition by this point. So I guess they kind of needed to remind us of when Crusher Khrushchev was around. Again, I wrote very little down about this. Nikita won with a sickle. I was repulsed by the ring trunks from Crusher Nolt here. The most visually appalling thing I've ever seen. A fat, out-of-shape white guy in half black, half leopard ring tights. It was enough to make me laugh, cry, and vomit all at the same time. But let's be frank here. This show was all pretty much a waste of time up until we got to the World Tag Team Championship match. First hour, complete void filler. What we really came here to talk about this week was Barry Windham and Lex Luger defending their World Tag Team titles against Tully and Arn. I mean, looking back, I wish they would have just made this the entire 2 hours, because it would have been equally as great. Just cut out all the fat with the first hour and make this the full-length program. Oh, and yeah, I have to reiterate. Tully was perfectly fine to wrestle in this match. After being hung and nearly killed. Just a little bit of rope burn, I presume. He's fine. So anyway, let me sort of lay out the gauntlet here before we talk about the details of everything that went down. This was more than just a World Tag Team title defense. It was actually a very important milestone in the NWA timeline in '88. Arguably one of the bigger news bulletins to come out of the entire year. You know, at least when it comes to the on-screen story material and not the Turner buyout. What started as a hot match basically turned into cold charcoal by the end. And I'll just say this. I've had this conversation so many times when it comes to talking about old school tag team wrestling. Just, I'm not going to say any more. Go watch the match. If you want to understand what true tag team wrestling used to be, like all these people that watch the product today and think good tag team wrestling is just a bunch of meaningless cluster fucks of 3-ways and 4-ways with no story attached to it, with teams that aren't over. Fuck that noise, dude. This is real tag team wrestling. I don't care what anybody says. Eat a dick if you don't like it. This was so great, dude. Hot action-packed match from start to finish. It's a struggle. It's a chase. It's a roller coaster. Ups and downs, ebbs and flows everywhere. Everything you could possibly ask for. You know, if Barry and Lex are in control early on, and Tully and Arn are fighting and scrapping to try to make the tag to get to the other corner, it looks like a real struggle. And vice versa. You know, when Tully and Arn are in there controlling the match, and the babyfaces are the ones valiantly fighting to get to their corner, it looks like a real struggle. You know, I love the dynamics of the Horsemen taking cheap shots whenever they can, getting under the babyface's skin by trying to run interference constantly and prevent the other babyface from getting to the other corner to help out their partner. You know, especially when we saw what happened with Barry at the end. The story they were telling here made absolute perfect sense. In the early stages, you had Barry getting worked over and needing to resort to Luger to help him out. So you get that initial hot tag where Luger's running wild and trying to get things back in their control. And right as soon as it looks like they're about to turn the tables, Luger goes to tag in Barry again, but Luger's immediately knocked out to the floor. And while you got Barry and Arn in the ring, Tully goes out and runs Luger into the ring post. And that subsequently cuts Luger open up at the forehead. So he gets a little bit of juice here, and he's down selling. Meanwhile, Barry's in there having to fend for himself for the next few minutes. You get JJ openly mocking Barry from the floor, going, "He's not there for you." Like, you even see Barry looking around several times, like wondering, where's Luger? He has no idea that he just got run into the ring post earlier. He probably assumes that Luger's stalling or trying to avoid getting back in the ring. So finally, the big moment comes. When Barry sees Luger struggling to get up to the apron, his face is a crimson mask. Barry doesn't have any concerns about that. Never even crosses his mind. He's pissed off. He forcibly tags in Luger, picks him up, body slams him into the ring, and from there he just lays into Luger and starts going to town on him. Kills him with a lariat. You know, the Horsemen are watching like guard dogs getting ready to pick the bones. And when you get JR and Tully going ballistic at the table, trying to figure out what the hell's going on, Barry outright leaves Luger high and dry. He and JJ go to the back. And after the Horsemen get the pin and become the new champions, you see Barry turn over his shoulder, and he looks at Tully and Arn, gives him that little smile, and then he waves up the 4 sign. And that right there, that was the point where you knew, fuck. JJ got to him. And there's all this pandemonium and confusion going on. You see the Midnight Rider bolt out from the locker room trying to attend to Luger. Of course, at that point, all the smart fans are going, it's clearly Dusty. Only Dusty fucking Rhodes would draw attention to himself like that during an angle that doesn't concern him at all. Still gonna make it all about himself. So he gives chase. He storms off to the back to hunt down Barry. And he goes right into the Lion's Den. The heel locker room. Gets in Barry's face. Asks what the hell he's doing. And then like a pack of dogs, the heels all gang up on the Midnight Rider and immediately go for the mask. Because again, the story is we're on a mission to reveal that the Midnight Rider is Dusty. Got to get that mask off and reveal it to the camera. That way he'll be suspended for a full calendar year. but it was only a tease because they managed to get the mask off, but then a bunch of the baby faces run in and cover up his face to make sure the camera doesn't get a good shot. And then they all run out of the room. And then JJ's there going, "Don't stand there like an idiot. Go after him. Get a shot." It was pitch perfect. An awesome TV match with a great finish. They pulled the trigger on the Barry heel turn. And it was actually a really clever swerve if you think about it. All this time, we've been seeing Luger feud with the Horsemen on TV. I think in a lot of people's minds, you could actually buy into the idea that it would have been Luger that sided with the Horsemen again, just because of all that history. But when they went with Barry, I think it legitimately caught everybody off guard. Nobody saw that coming. And they could have easily done this turn on a house show or, and God, even the Crockett Cup if they wanted to. But they chose to do it here on the Saturday syndicated TBS show in front of millions of viewers. They really wanted to plant this as a huge monumental turning point in the company. I thought this was the perfect place to do it, because it also calls into question the brackets for the Crockett Cup now. Barry and Lex were supposed to be in the tournament. And obviously that won't be the case now. So what happens? Well, if you don't know the end result of the 88 Crockett Cup, there's a lot of unanswered questions here. And the other thing, too, is they didn't do this at the studio in front of 30 people. They did it at the Jacksonville Coliseum in front of thousands of fans. Screaming, passionate, loyal fans. Can't praise it enough, dude. Remove all the other garbage that took place on this week's show. And this is the best episode of Crockett TV in 1988, hands down. If this entire show is just the tag title match, might have been one of the best episodes we reviewed in the entire 3 years we've been doing this. Unfortunately, they preceded this with an hour of boring squashes and not so great promo material. So it ended up being a piece of gold inside a shit stew. And there was more stuff that came after this, which is like, just why? Why bother? They came back from that hot angle and then stuck a microphone in front of Kevin Sullivan's mouth. I was like, dude, fuck off. The last guy I wanted to hear talk on this show right now is Kevin fucking Sullivan. I have no idea what he said. It doesn't matter. The crowd was already dead silent after everything they just witnessed. Nothing else is going to come close to topping that angle. They still had like another 15 minutes of programming left. He talked about Dusty for 5 minutes. It was pointless. Nobody cared. Nor did anybody care about Mike Rotunda versus Sam Bass. God bless Mike Rotunda. Nothing against him. But we literally just saw one of the biggest angles of the mid to late 80s in wrestling. Then they turn around in the following segment and expect people to give a fuck about a Mike Rotunda squash. Talk about falling a filet steak with a plate of burnt toast. The announcers couldn't even pretend to give a crap about this. All they could talk about was Barry Windham potentially being the Fourth Horseman. Just totally broken up and disheartened over everything we just saw. This was a death slot. Rotunda won with the airplane spin. And, then they took the remaining airtime to show the closing moments of that title match again. Really trying to recap everything in detail and make sense of the whole situation. And man, even when you watch it on replay, there are glimpses of moments where you think, well, maybe Barry just thought Luger was playing hooky. Maybe he thought Luger was purposefully trying to avoid getting in the ring to help out Barry. He was a former Horseman. If there was ever a moment to backstab him, this would have been the time to do it. In the hot tag spot where Barry ran wild on the Horsemen, that only really lasted like a full minute before Tully came in and cock-blocked Barry from behind. And then Barry spent the next minute looking around wondering where the hell Luger disappeared to. He didn't realize that he just got his face rammed into a ring post. So you can kind of see from his vantage point, Barry was fed up. He probably thought Lex was waiting around to try to sabotage him and cost him the belts. So in his mind, Barry thought he was doing the right thing. But then there's the other side where you look at the argument and think, well, maybe this was the plan all along. Maybe Barry had a conversation with JJ beforehand and they had this all pre-planned. Okay, we'll have to wait and find out what the explanation is. But man, that last visual before the fade to black, Barry throwing up the Horseman jacket and riding off into the limo with the group. The ultimate knife twist into the jugular, dude. That guy sold out, and he sold out big time. And again, hindsight is 20/20. I understand there is an element to this where you argue, okay, so even if Barry was in cahoots with the Horsemen the whole time, why the fuck would he voluntarily go out there to get his ass kicked for 15 minutes? Also, he could just align with them in the same segment. Yeah, there is a bit of a logic gap there, I suppose. And it's not like it's the first time we've seen these guys touch. And we've seen a handful of Luger, Barry versus Tully Arn matches. Or Luger and Barry versus some combination of the Horsemen. So I get it. It is kind of a weird scenario to gauge. All of a sudden the Horsemen are chummy with Barry and buying him drinks. After they just spent the last how many months beating him up and trying to end his career. It is one of those things where you're kind of relying on the Fallout explanation to tie up the loose ends. And hopefully they address it on TV thoroughly, because it is important detail. That's not something you're going to gloss over and not mention. If the whole thing is, ha-ha, we fooled you. It was a long-term ruse all along. Okay, yeah, that's kind of stupid. And for the record, I do not honestly remember what the story explanation was for Barry turning heel in 88. I know what the behind-the-scenes rationale was, but in terms of the kayfabe on-camera explanation, I really don't remember. Jealousy? Bitter resentment? The grass was always greener on the other side? We will find out. It is funny how we often remember the Barry Windham heel turn and the whole alignment with the Horsemen. But in terms of like the actual justification, that we sort of neglect. Maybe it'll be a thing where we look back at it with modern eyes and realize just how stupid it all was. Wrestling history has a tendency to do that. Remember when people thought the Attitude Era was the shit? Oh, trust me, we're going to put that theory to bed before not too long. Give me a few more years on the channel and we will tear that era a new asshole. The fun really begins when I get to skewer the Invasion era. Talk about what a pile of shit that all was. That's also when I lose my subscriber base and talk about how that period essentially killed my passion for wrestling for the next 20-something years. Story for down the road. Stay tuned. All right, so jumping over to Midsouth here. The wait is finally over. After several bait and switches with the midgets in the last several weeks. I completely forgotten about that. Remember there were like 3 weeks in a row where Watson Pierce kept advertising the little guys? but there'd always be something that got in the way of them being able to show the match on TV. Like, be it time constraints or other angles that took place during the show. Like, I even remember Watts said, "All right, people, no false advertising this time. We're going to tape the match and we're going to air it on delay next week." Pretty sure that was like 3 weeks ago now. Apparently, fans were legitimately sending in nasty letters complaining about getting jerked around with the midgets match. They really wanted to see him for whatever reason. So, well, we actually got to see him this week. All it took was a bunch of rabid, screaming Southerners to get on their case about it. But the big story from last time was everything centering around the Mid-South Tag title match. Mr. Olympia and Ted DiBiase are the new champions after defeating Mr. Wrestling 2 and Tiger Conway Jr. through nefarious means. General Akbar had fed Mr. Olympia a gimmick to place on the toe of his boot. So when he went to dropkick Tiger Conway, it knocked him out. And the heels scored the victory and left with the belts. So they re-aired that footage at the top of the program, just to let everybody know what went down. Definitely go check out my review of that match last week if you are following along in the timeline. It's a great TV match. Super hot crowd. Lots of stuff going on, but I mean, it's an absolutely perfect Mid-South type match. But as we pitch to the ring for our opening TV bout, we get... not the midgets quite yet. It's Mr. Olympia versus Mike Jackson. I'll tell you what, Jackson looked like a midget standing next to Olympia. So while this was going on, Bill Watts basically spent the entire match baby-facing Hacksaw Duggan, pretty much indicating that he is no longer affiliated with the Rat Pack, after Duggan had quote-unquote fired Matt Bourne from the team after their little blow-up a few weeks ago. Ted DiBiase pretty much washed his hands of Duggan altogether, and he has now moved his alliances with General Akbar and Mr. Olympia. So I think Watts was mainly trying to get over the fact that Duggan's no longer associated with DiBiase and he's full-fledged babyface now. Overall, there wasn't much to it. You know, Jackson's a good scrappy underdog challenger. He gave Olympia a little bit of a hard time early on, but you know, Olympia still put him away rather easily. I did laugh at the idea that Olympia hits Jackson with a sit-out pile driver, but immediately afterwards, he still has to go over with his sleeper hold. Assuming he wasn't already out cold to begin with after being dropped on his fucking head. Now, got to make sure we put Jackson away with that sleeper. And then we come back to the ring for Hacksaw Butch Reed versus Tony Zane. Boyd Pierce delivering the quote of the century at the beginning here. Two men with great muscular physiques. Tony Zane. Muscular physique. Having a hard time buying that one. There was also another weird conversation related to working out here. I think it was Bill Watts talking about how much Butch Reed was inspired to come to the Mid-South area because he admired the Junkyard Dog's drive to work out at the gym and maintain a good body. Yeah. Talk about comments that did not age well at all. Butch Reed was about to be rapidly humbled. I can assure you he was not thinking the same thing in late 83, early to mid 84. You know what, though? I will give him this. When it comes to Tony Zane's performance in this match, he actually stayed with Hacksaw for a good chunk of it. You know, they didn't send him out there to be the bumping dummy for 5 minutes. No, they actually let Zane get in some offense on Hacksaw Reed here. They did some solid-looking 1-2 exchanges at various points. You know, Reed did a great job firing up and staying on him. He ended up winning with the flying shoulder tackle. But they gave it some time. Tony Zane held his own for a brief period. Physically, he still looked like a giant bag of soggy pudding. But even Bill Watts was putting over his athleticism at certain points. I don't know what the hell match he was watching. Athletic is not the kind of thing I would use to describe Tony Zane. But again, short strides. Before he became jobber for life, they were at least willing to try him out and see if he could become a promising young underling. From there, we had Tiger Conway Jr. versus Frank Levert. It was a completely forgettable 3-minute match. I wrote down virtually nothing about it. Tiger Conway did about 70 moves in a row, and then he eventually won with an extremely botched flying head scissors takeover, which I can merely best describe as Tiger Conway gave himself his own powerbomb. And then he stacked up Frank for the fastest 3 count in the history of fast counts. Horrendous finish. Rest of the match was just boring and uneventful. And that took us to the Black Ninja versus Mr. Wrestling 2. The complete polar opposite of the match we just talked about. This was a freaking battle, dude. Like, these guys were laying into each other from start to finish. Back and forth, kicks and strikes. Neither guy giving an inch. I think even by the end, Watts was calling it a war. I mean, it was easily the best Kendo Nagasaki match I've ever seen in Midsouth. He's in there working over 2 for the heat. You get 2 throwing haymakers and trying to fight back. Granted, I would not call any of their stuff fluid, because, it really wasn't. It just kind of looked like 2 pissed off guys having a bar fight. And that's why it worked. General Akbar ends up getting dumped into the ring after he got a little too close to the fire at the end. And of course, that was a cue for Kamala to run down to try to interfere. And this next part is fucking wild. For the next minute straight, you got Mr. Wrestling Cena in there just wrecking shop and beating up the heels single-handedly. 3 of them, by the way. Just firing knee lifts on everybody. Guys are bumping over the top rope to the floor. Wrestling 2's in there just dominating everybody like it's nothing. It really was like watching John Cena in 1983. No selling everything in the book. Just blistering through all the bad guys by himself. No problem. Like a fucking impervious Power Ranger. And then eventually have Kamala miss a splash on 2. So he ends up taking out the Black Ninja. And because this was wrestling in the 80s, even though we already saw 15,000 run-ins and multiple attempts at attacking 2, after 2 catches Kendo with a knee lift and goes to cover him, Alfred Neely's right there to count the finish. Because obviously 2 still had to go over, right? I just kind of had to roll my eyes at the end there and be like, all right, whatever. Fine. The crowd was into it. It was just so absurd. Watching Wrestling 2 beat up Kendo, Kamala, and Skandar Akbar by himself until the last 15 seconds when Tiger Conway runs out and then drop kicks Kamala out to the floor. Total veteran move right there. I ain't selling any of your shit, brother. I'm beating up everybody and walking out with my hand raised. That's how Wrestling 2 does business, Jack. Can't fault him for that. Wrestling 2 understood how this shit works. And then after having a good hearty laugh at that segment, we finally get our long-awaited Midget Showdown. And of course, Bill Watts is setting the stage beforehand by letting the audience know, yes, these men are very small in stature, but they're all incredibly gifted athletes and powerhouses in their own right. And I'll say this. I probably had this discussion on the channel before. It's been a while, though, so, I figure it's worth mentioning again. Yeah, I think for a lot of the younger generation, especially people that are around my age that maybe grew up watching a little bit of midgets wrestling on mainstream TV whenever you would rarely see it, especially in the WWF, WWE, it was never taken seriously. To Vince, the midgets were always a comedy act. It was a segment on the show where instead of maybe focusing on the individual talents, the goal was always to present the entire concept of midget wrestling as a joke. And if you need further proof of that, go listen to my Survivor Series 93 review and that abortion of a tag match with Lawler and the fake Doinks. Fuck that match. Now, yes, midget wrestling here in the States was always considered an attraction. It was something, as Watts noted here, billed for the kids. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you used to see midget wrestling quite often in the territories. But what they did right is that they never presented it like a joke. I mean, you take a look at Little Tokyo and Ivan the Terrible versus Lone Eagle and Cowboy Lang. Yes, there were comedy spots with Alfred Neely. Like the wrestlers trying to hide behind him and then crawl under his legs to get away from their opponents. Like at one point, Tokyo got pissed at him and kicked his leg out. So Neely took a bump for it and then chased him around the ring. Like it's not to say there were not slapstick moments here, but that's the key word. Moments. It wasn't just a one-sided joke from the beginning to end where they completely wore off the gag in the first 30 seconds. They still wrestled. They still worked a professional wrestling match. I mean, I'll tell you what, Alfred Neely was the real star of the whole thing. Like, just him constantly getting fed up with everybody's bullshit. Like, them trampling over him and then dogpiling him at certain points. It's one of those things where you can appreciate this style of wrestling when it's done in moderation. Sort of a nice way to break up the flow of everything else on the program. There's no real story attached to it because the midgets weren't a mainstay on Midsouth TV every week. So the fans could kind of get lost in the action and not really care one way or the other who won. And it worked in that sense. I mean, to be honest, I don't even remember who won this match. Didn't matter. It's a conversation I don't really hear a lot of people bring up anymore. Probably because the jokes write themselves. Like, why don't we get midgets wrestling in WWE or AEW? Well, the answer is because most of the midgets are probably bigger than the alleged grown athletes in both companies. That's probably true. That's the scary part. In all seriousness, though, it is sort of a lost art in today's business. I think we kind of took it for granted back in the day. In today's product where all the matches look the same and all the wrestlers are practically the same fucking size by and large, you really do wonder if a midgets match could do much more harm. And this was better than most shit I saw from the undercard in AEW for the last 4 years. Plus, these guys were all in reasonably good shape. So I don't know, man. Twice a year? Having a midgets match booked for your card? Just for shits and giggles? I mean, no other promotion is doing anything like this right now. It would be unique. But maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part. But that took us back for regular size ring action. King Kong Bundy had a quick one with Randy Barber. Bundy continues to generate more and more heat in Mid-South as the weeks go by. It's actually a remarkably genius gimmick if you think about it. The gimmick is, I'm big and bad. I hate wrestling geeks. But they keep feeding me geeks every week. So I'm just going to rub it in all your faces. And that signature 5 count is just classic. Bundy smack talking all the people in the crowd afterwards. How in the fuck this guy never got shot, I'll never know. And then we had a quick standby match to close things out. Wild Bill Irwin and Rip Rogers wrestled Art Cruz and Tim Horner. I know it's always easy for me to sort of tap out during these standbys because, there's usually nothing interesting to talk about. That was kind of the case here. Although I do appreciate Watts drawing connections between a lot of the younger guys that are working prelims, talking about the current main eventers right now that came up through the ranks just like these guys did. I think Watts brought up Ted DiBiase as an example here, saying that, he did the standbys just like these guys are, but he wound up growing into a major star in just a short time through all that hard work. So it's only a matter of time before one of these next young prodigies comes up in the business. Sort of giving it a purpose instead of just going like, we have some TV time to fill, so here, watch this random match with Tim Horner. No finish. Cruz and Horner have been working as a pretty frequent tag team on TV. Actually kind of forgot those guys got paired up for a small window. Hey, anything to give Tim Horner some color, right? I kid. He wasn't that bad. Honestly, this show didn't have a whole lot going on in terms of major development. A lot of squashes, a lot of ring action, pretty steady throughout the 45 minutes. The Wrestling 2 Black and Ninja match was a lot of fun. And if you enjoy some low-key entertainment, the Midgets match was pretty enjoyable. Alfred Neely was a superstar of that segment. But that's kind of all we had going on this week. Fairly skippable show. Especially if you're looking for those big, hot angles or impactful moments that are kind of moving the stories along. Didn't really get a lot of that this week. Swear to God, I'm not making this up. I went back and looked at my notes from last week's episode of World Class. I was convinced that they accidentally duplicated this week and last week's show. Like something got fucked up in the production and they accidentally taped over this week's episode with last week. Turns out that was not the case. They're just so creatively stifled at this point. Nobody ever thought to themselves, we did start last week's show with a one-man gang squash. Maybe we ought to consider changing it up a little bit and start with something else this time. Nope. They just started with another one-man gang squash. Oh, but this time, he wrestled Mr. Ebony. Yes, the classic mysterious masked man from the bowels of, whatever city he was from. Los Angeles, Las Vegas, somewhere around there. The only highlight of this entire segment was Gang getting on the microphone and threatening Mark Lawrence by saying, "There's two kinds of people in this world. There's punks and there's punk slappers. And I'm a punk slapper." Okay, Hawk. He also demanded that Lorenz introduce Gary Hart as Slick Gary Hart from now on. Was that the first time we ever heard One Man Gang cut a promo on this show? I think it's the first time I've ever heard him speak. Aside from the occasional screams of "ah" and "ah." Other than that, he actually said words. He spoke the English language. Quite fluidly, in fact. He was pretty great, I have to admit. As superfluous as he's been during most of his Dallas run, he does add a layer of entertainment to the show that nobody else kind of brings. Punk slappers. Graphic tees selling at a store near you. It's funny. This whole match went about 5 minutes. I did not write jack shit down except for the finish. Gang wins with a wacky elbow drop from the middle rope. The rest of it may as well have happened in a parallel universe. Because I don't remember a goddamn thing. I was still trying to figure out what the hell a punk slapper was. It was also around this point where I still wasn't sure whether or not I was watching the correct episode. And then we had a fairly quick Sunshine announcement after the break. It was, again, super wacky and really over the top. But it was pretty awesome visually. So, well, just to kind of summarize her point here, Sunshine vowed that she came back to World Class to clean up the mess. Yes, she's the cleaner. So she stole Kenny Omega's gimmick, apparently. She brought in Hercules Hernandez so that he could stop guys like Gino and Chris Adams, Jim Cornette, and, quote, his crusade. I presume she forgot who Bobby and Dennis were. And while Hercules is doing a sufficient job at taking the fight to the top heels, she also realizes that these men do not fight at fair or even playing fields. So now Sunshine has brought in a second cleaner to help Hercules take the fight to all the bad guys. And again, this was really cool with how they set this up. Basically, the idea is that Sunshine is delivering some kind of press conference on presumably a stage. And in the background, you see this dark silhouette. And there's a huge dramatic build-up to reveal that it is none other than the great Kabuki. He is back. And he is back as a babyface, no less. And it was awesome, too. When you see Kabuki step out from the shadows and they put the spotlight on him, and then it gets all cartoony and wacky as he whips out his nunchucks and starts doing the ritualistic choreography with the gimmicks. Like, for the next 20 seconds, all you hear is the super stereotypical Japanese grunting. Hya! 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 Just like over and over again for like a whole minute. I mean, I was trying not to laugh. It was so campy. But hey, great to see Kabuki back in the Dallas region. It is also very interesting to see him back in a capacity where he's not under the wing of Gary Hart, the brainchild of the Kabuki gimmick. Now they're both off doing their own separate thing. I mean, I guess from Sunshine's point of view, if you're going to bring in a hired gun, bring in the crazy guy with the nunchucks. That'll send the heels cowering in fear in a heartbeat. Yeah, it was a good deal. And that all kind of blended in with the next match on the card. They actually advertised it as Hernandez versus Hernandez. I only knew it was a matter of time before Ken Mantell took one look at their names and said, "Holy shit, we got 2 Hernandez names on this roster. Well, we should book him in a match." Genius. So, of course, as I'm typing my notes for this match, I have to consciously make sure that I do not blankly refer to somebody as Hernandez. Elsewise, I'd have no idea who I was referring to. It is Gino versus Hercules. Kind of your stereotypical Gino Hernandez overdramatic selling showcase. I did like his strategy for attempting to keep away from Hercules. After getting Atomic dropped, he goes, "I've got it. if I turn my back and I hug the ring post, there's no way Hercules can attack me. So, of course, Hercules just grabs Gino by the ring trunks and then reveals the tan line around his ass. Yeah, that spot never gets old. Gino did get a chance to work over Hercules here. There's a spot where he grabbed one of the belts out from ringside and just waffled Hercules over the back of the head with it. Just fucking nailed him. Looked brutal. And of course, they do some more stuff for another couple of minutes before Chris Adams runs in for the blatant DQ. And that was a setup for Kabuki to make the run in and send Gino and Chris packing. Made better by the way that Gino and Chris sold it before they scampered away. Chris Adams trying to get in position for the kangaroo kick. Like he was literally about to engage in fucking taekwondo with the great Kabuki. It was amazing. And then Gino grabs a chair and then realizes that he's no match for Kabuki's nunchucks. So he just drops the chair and bolts. That made the run and stuff worth it. Just to see Gino and Chris oversell the reaction to Kabuki's run-in. But, I mean, the match is a total nothing burger. And remember, this is all building to that tag match where Gino and Chris issued the open contract to any babyface team in the promotion. Clearly, I mean, you got to assume that's setting up Kabuki and Hercules, right? Yeah, I mean, it also may tie in with the two-ring tag team turmoil thing they're doing. I still have no idea what the proper stipulation for that match is. I mean, it's basically a knockoff Survivor Series match. Just exclude the elimination stuff, because it's one fall to a finish. The whole thing is still really confusing and poorly explained. So then we get the Midnights versus Brian Adias and Scott Casey. If you need further proof of a match where you knew the Midnights were fucked in Dallas from day one, I present to you Exhibit X. Dude. When I saw the timeline for this thing, and I saw how long they actually devoted to this match, I was like, seriously? I need to watch Beautiful Bobby and Loverboy Dennis work with Brian Adias and Scott fucking Casey for 15 minutes? Oh. I mean, it was fine. Completely redundant after 6 minutes. It's just, I don't know, man. I'm a Midnight Express fan through and through. You all know that. It just bothers the shit out of me when I go back and see these tapes of the Midnights selling for long stretches of time with underneath or mid-card jabronis. Like, no offense to Casey and Diaz, but let's call a spade a fucking spade, people. They were underneath guys in world class. As hard as they were trying with Brian Adias over the last few years, he was not a Von Erich or a Freebird. And when you watch so many Midnights tapes, and you see where they wrestled prior to this and where they wound up by the end of 85, I don't know. It's just so dumb. Watching them fucking flounder here in Dallas, working 15-minute TV matches with mid-carders. Such a waste. Like, I didn't buy any of this. These guys are gearing up for a championship match with the Fantastics. They can't even believably beat these two juggernauts without great difficulty. You know, all this around the same period where we're watching them demolish guys in Crockett Promotions and getting booked like actual main event stars that kick ass. Maybe I'm just being a mark. I don't know. I mean, the action was fine. Pretty traditional tag match in terms of layout and structure. Bobby was funny at the end. right as Diaz gets tagged in and he starts making the comeback, Bobby Eaton does this goofy turnaround where he flails his arms in the air and does a big do-si-do before begging and pleading for mercy. I've never seen anything so ridiculously silly, yet so wonderful at the same time. You know, of course, the finish is JC running in to strike at Diaz with a racket while Bronco is tangled up with Condrey and Casey in the other corner. There's a good use of alliteration right there. Condrey and Casey in the corner. But again, you know, heel manager interference to help the Midnights beat a pair of underneath guys when they were literally about to wrestle the Fantastics for the American Tag Titles. It's just not conducive to making these guys stand out like big attractions. I mean, if you only watch footage of these guys in Mid-South and you had no knowledge of their success anywhere else in the country, I mean, you take a look at these guys here and you think they were just an average middle-of-the-road tag team. And that sucks because it's far from the truth. They were much bigger than that. But World Class never gave them the platform to get as over as they were in Mid-South the year prior. And it's a damn shame. All because they were so afraid they might get over more than the Von Erichs. And that really became prevalent when you fast forward to the main event here. What was initially slated to be Chris Adams versus Kerry von Erich wound up turning into Dennis Condrey versus Kerry von Erich. And they set up in the pre-match promo. Chris Adams doing a fiery, passionate heat promo, saying that he wanted to fight Kerry on the show, but the doctors would not clear him to compete because Kevin Von Erich attacked his eye with a chair and he opened up a laceration above his eyebrow. 8 stitches required as a result. And even though Chris really wanted this fight, he couldn't get medically cleared to compete in time. So the fight cannot happen as advertised. So they left the door open for Jim Cornette to come down and then have Dennis fill the slot because, oh, why not? The Von Erichs have been ducking the Midnights ever since day one. It's the closest thing we were ever going to come to seeing the Midnights versus the Von Erichs in some capacity. So let's do it. Now, of course, this they could not give 15 minutes. You know, this one only got about 7, give or take. It was a fun 7 minutes. One of the rare times we actually got to see Dennis Condrey in singles action. I don't even remember that being an intermittent occurrence in Crockett. I mean, I've seen a handful of beautiful Bobby singles matches. Dennis, not so much. But it was good. Dennis called the whole thing, you could tell. Kerry fed for him a bit. Didn't outright squash him like a pancake. But they did some nice back and forth chain wrestling. You know, Condrey tried to capitalize at the end, but when he went for the neck breaker off the ropes, Kerry turned it into a backslide for the 3 count. And then right as JC and Condrey were doing the standoff with Kevin and Kerry, that was the cue for Chris and Gino to hit the ring and start getting their heat back on the Von Erichs. The best visual in that brawl was the end where the fucking Brian Adias runs in his tighty whities. He's got his underwear pulled up so high you could see his ass cheeks hanging out. God. These guys were so lucky they were in good shape. But, yeah, I mean, there really wasn't much to report on aside from what I already mentioned. You could easily call into question the logic of beating one half of the Midnights when, again, did I mention, they're about to wrestle for the tag team titles. But again, that's also implying the Midnights were ever really considered a serious tag team in World Class. Christ, it took him 15 minutes to beat fucking Brian Adias and Scott Casey. I can easily see why Kerry wouldn't have a hard time beating him. And literally on the same show, too. Can't make it up. The Midnights go over in the previous tag match, less than 10 minutes later, they're right back out doing the job in the main event. Brilliant fucking booking. That Ken Mantell, man. Give him his flowers. He was a smart chap. Give me a break. Yeah, this show kind of sucked, if I'm being honest. 4 matches on the card. None of them really meant anything. Another gang squash to fill out the first few minutes. DQ finish to a Gino Hercules match that went less than 5. A boring tag match with a Midnight Struggle to beat 2 mid-card geeks. Never even got out of first gear. You know, and a decent little impromptu main event with the most predictable finish of all time. So if you can get over that, I guess it was an okay episode. You know, this is the trouble World Class has been in for a long time. The lack of star depth. You know, and especially just over the last week when we saw the Freebirds on TV for all of 8 minutes? But they were there. Kind of forget how much they contributed when they were around full time. And we've still got another 5 or so years before the company goes under entirely. You know, I think 85 was sort of the red flag year in terms of kind of learning things were not really in good shape. Even if the business was still hot. Air quotes around that. By 86, though, when they withdrew from the working agreement with the NWA, yeah, that's pretty much the end of it. More stories for later on as we track all these timelines and talk about the good, bad, and ugly of classic wrestling. So as we wind up things for the show, make sure you guys subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Again, I appreciate everybody that comes back to check out the show every week. For the minimal amount of effort I put into it, I'll take the viewership where I can get it. It's like AEW. It can only go up from here. I was kidding. Partially. So, yeah. Catch you guys on Monday for the continuation of more classic wrestling and a little bit of a brief SmackDown overview, and keep you posted for more good stuff. Take care. Peace out.